Like, why is that? Why do people hate the news so much?
I mean, fundamentally, I also think it comes back to how it makes them feel. You know, it doesn't make them feel good. And so, you know, as human beings, we often seek pleasure or avoid pain. And so if the news is making us feel, you know, experience painful emotions, we may try and avoid it. And that's been shown to be one of the biggest reasons that people actually avoid the news. But there's also a lack of engagement because I suppose of the formality of the term news as well. So like when I was speaking with some of the students that I was teaching, so many of them didn't think it was relevant to them because they didn't watch the news. But actually, when we began to speak about their media habits, where they were accessing information and what kind of information they were accessing, we were able to actually recognize that they do in some way engage with and consume, you know, news. But we sort of used a much more broader term for what we considered it to be. You know, is this informing us? Is this providing information about an event that we haven't experienced? Is it giving us insight into something we have experienced? You know, how is it actually helping us connect with the world around us? Because all of that is news. And then you kind of can go back into, well, what are the production processes behind that information? And then you kind of move to, is this more legacy news or is this alternative media? So you kind of have to get into the weeds of it for them to actually recognize that this is all news.
I should be clear as well. I don't think it's a strictly young person thing. Like most people I talk to, when I say, like, do you watch the news? They're like, no, I don't watch it. I'm not interested. And you know, maybe I'll protect his identity, but there is somebody I have in mind, even as we're speaking right now, who is very proud of the fact that he doesn't watch the news. It's almost like a badge of honor for him to be like, I'm not part of that whole system. I'm not interested. Do you find a lot of that in some of the work you do, people who have made a thing of not engaging with the news and sort of, you know, they've made a thing about the toxicity, the sort of, all that sort of stuff?
Yes, there is definitely people who kind of take an active stance against it. And I don't disrespect their reasons for doing that. But a lot of, I mean, when I asked the students, especially, I said, how many actively avoid the news? How many don't want to watch it at all and will go out of their way to avoid it? And of a class of 40, maybe 2 or 3 put their hands up. Oh. Similarly, I'll say, how many of you go out of your way to watch the news? You know, how many of you will actually seek out information to help you understand about what's going on in the world? And again, maybe sort of 3, 4, 5. So then there's everyone else in the middle, and you say, well, you know, how many people just kind of consume it passively? So they see it when they see it, they don't when they don't, and that's the kind of way in which they engage. So I think there's a huge passive contingency of people as well that don't necessarily actively avoid it. Yeah. But what we have seen from news avoidance particularly is that disengagement can also be much less conscious. So it's not necessarily a deliberate stance to say, I am not going to watch the news, but they do say, I don't care about the news. And that isn't necessarily an active strategy. It's because they've become desensitized. They become so used to hearing about the extreme and the extraordinary that it becomes normal and ordinary. And all of these kind of stories of outrage that we should perhaps be concerned about no longer affect us in the same way. We sort of become very apathetic towards them. Yeah. So it's disengagement.
It's actually fascinating because, you know, that experience you had in school, I had once, well, similar experience, I suppose, when I was leading a workshop on news and sort of how we consume news at what was it now? Some event. And, you know, similar to you asked the question, who watches news here? You know, you get the kind of the odd 3 or 4 people like, yeah, kind of, who doesn't really like it? A lot of people's hands have got, so I'm just kind of feeling the crowd. And one guy shares these thoughts and he said, I stopped watching the news 3 years ago. It was the best decision I ever made. My mental health increased, you know, and people were kind of, everyone's looking at him and I was just there like, I've still got a whole session to do about the news. And he's like, the point my life changed and became better was when I stopped watching the news. And you get a lot of that. I must confess, even our audience at Common Sense, some have told me that, you know, I'll read what you guys put out once in a while, but I don't watch the news because of my mental health. It makes me happier. I you know, to not know all the negative things that's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, again, have you seen some of that in your work?
That's